And hello, fabulous AP students. This is your favorite teacher, Mr. Jacobson. I am excited to be with you today. Now, today we're going to talk about labor, immigration, and migration during the Gilded Age. So we're going to look at what are the effects of labor, of low wages and poor conditions and immigrants coming over and people migrating and all those things are all going to have a toll and effect. So let us begin. Okay, so Mark Twain is one that sort of used the expression Gilded Age that sort of becomes the period that we're studying now. This is the latter end of the 1800s. Um, Wages were based on supply and demand. There's a man named David Ricardo. He claimed the iron law of wages, meaning that so you have higher wages for workers would increase worker population. So if you increase wages, then that's going to increase the population in the workforce because more people are going to want to work because there's more money to be made, right? And with more laborers in the workforce, that would lower wages because now there's not as the supply is plentiful. So when the supply is plentiful, then the cost goes down. Um, so anyway, so that's why he was basically saying that if we increase wages, then it really doesn't do much good because it just sort of has this vicious cycle. If you'll look over here. Now, we have some struggles happening with organized labor. Just keep in mind that there are intolerable working conditions happening. People are not very happy with it. Unions are starting to arise. They want to improve things, especially like the work hours for laborers. They want to improve conditions. Some of the factories are unsanitary and unsafe. So workers began to strike, and so then the employers started coming up with tactics to sort of fight against these strikes. So the first tactic would be a lockout. So you just close your factory and make it so that the workers can't really communicate with each other, organize before there's an actual strike, and then you just clean up, find out who's in charge, and fire them or whatever. You have a blacklist going around, so these employers would have a list of names of potential workers who are trying to unionize, and they would pretty much, when they interview someone, they know you're on the list, and they'd be like, "No, you're not getting that job." So there's a blacklist that went around. You had the yellow dog contract, where basically you sign saying you're not going to join a union, you have no desire. Or you have private guards and state militia, and those people could come in and put down the strikes, and that was actually needed in some of the strikes as well. So the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, you got workers in Baltimore on the Ohio Railroad. Okay, it's going to take about 11 states where this is going to happen. They're going to have cut wages by the railroad company, and it's just going to become a big mess. 500,000 other workers from different industries are kind of going to get involved because, they're all part of the workforce, right? So if they could do it to them, they could do it to me. So this led to more violence. You got federal troops coming in trying to stop it, and 100 people are dead. Union leaders used many different approaches like politics, strikes, picketing, boycotts, slowdowns, all to try to gain more recognition for their union and, more importantly, collective bargaining, where they can actually get some concessions for different improvements from the employer. So you have some attempts here. So a craft union is a union that's just focused on one type of work. So say mining or say um, the railroad or whatever, right? So that's a craft union. And then you have National Labor Union. This is one of the first attempts to just sort of unionize in all the states. Was founded in 1866, had like 640,000 members by 1868. biggest victory was winning an 8-hour workday for federal workers, not all workers, just federal workers. And then it lost support when a depression hit because people got more important things to worry about. You can't even find proper work, right? So labor unions don't really have that much sway when there's an economic downturn. So you have another important group known as the Knights of Labor, and they're going to organize in 1869. At first, they're going to start like a secret society because they don't want to really be known that it's happening. But it's going to get more weight. By 1886, they'll have 730,000 members. However, it's going to lose support after it kind of gets tied to the Haymarket bombing. So the Haymarket bombing, there was on May Day, a movement called for a strike because they wanted to achieve an 8-hour workday. So these aren't federal workers; these are private workers, right, or public. Private would be a better word. Violence broke out and a bomb was thrown, and that bomb killed 7 police officers. So immediately you have the Knights of Labor, who are kind of somewhat connected to this, um, they're gonna kind of get demonized as violent extremists and radicals and terrorists and all that. So the Knights of Labor are gonna lose a lot of a lot of favor in the minds of the people. So then you got the American Federation of Labor that comes about in 1886, and that's going to be an association. They'll have about 25 craft unions that are a part of it. It's going to be led by Samuel Gompers. Now, this is going to be used as to negotiate new contracts with collective bargaining. And anyway, the American Federation of Labor is going to be around till for quite some time. But by 1901, it's going to have over 1 million members. So you got strikes and strike breaking happening. So the Homestead strike is, you have a plant in Pittsburgh. It's a steel plant, and the workers are getting their wages cut by 20%. So you got lockouts happening, private guards, all these different tactics to sort of try to break the strikes are happening. Um, Anyway, so 16 people, mostly steelworkers, are going to die eventually in the conflict. The failure of the Homestead strike set back the union movement in the steel industry until the New Deal. So it's not going to work. It's going to cause a lot of problems. People are going to die. And then people are going to start wondering, okay, in the steel industry at least, is it worth unionizing? So a popular one is called the Pullman strike. So the bottom line is Pullman is a company that makes train cars, right? These train cars are used for sleeping, so passengers will sleep there. And anyway, so the workers, they just got tired of the situation there. They're cut wages and everything, and anyway, so they strike. They come in contact with the American Railroad Union because their product affects the American Railroad Union, right? So Eugene V. Debs, he is going to get involved, and he's going to direct the railroad workers not to handle any trains with Pullman cars. So now we have Pullman cars where the workers have in essence said, yeah, we're not going to work, and now they've got the workers on the railroads to sort of try to say, yeah, we're not gonna handle any Pullman cars. So anyway, the unions are going to try to boycott all rail transportation across the country. Railroad owners are going to get pretty pissed. They're going to start banding together. They're going to support Pullman. They're going to start linking Pullman cars to mail trains, which are federal trains. So President Grover Cleveland kind of gets involved in this issue, and he makes sure that the army is employed so that these mail trains would keep running despite all these protests, and they're trying to stop it. So a federal court issue is a given with an injunction forbidding interference with the operation of the mail and ordering railroad workers to abandon the boycott and the strike. So basically, now the federal government's involved. They're saying you're not going to stop the railroad from delivering the mail. For failing to respond, Debs, Eugene V. Debs, he is going to be arrested, and when he gets out of jail, he will become a known socialist in the Socialist Party at that point. So you have the growth of immigration happening. Some of the reasons why immigration's happening is because, well, there's a lot of push and pull factors happening, right? But we're going to see immigration just exponentially growing within the Gilded Age. And remember that pushes are negative factors that, kind of make the people flee their homes where they used to be. And pull factors are the positive attractions of adopting another country, and wanting to live there. So, what are some of the pushes here? So, in Europe, we got the poverty of displaced farm workers driven from land by political turmoil and mechanization of farm work. So, they're industrializing in their area, which is making it harder to farm and make a living. You have overcrowding and joblessness in European cities as a result of population growth. You have religious persecution, particularly against Jews in Eastern Europe. Now, what are the pull factors? So the things that are pulling people to America is one, America just has a great reputation for political and religious freedom. They also have economic opportunities, especially in the West. There's an abundance of industrial jobs in the U.S. cities. The introduction of large steamships made a one-way trip relatively inexpensive and possible for millions to emigrate over to the Americas. So, technology, political and religious freedom, and economic opportunities are all a very big part. So you got old immigrants and new immigrants. So the old immigrants are around 1880, and those old immigrants are looking, they're like from Northern and Western Europe. So they share a lot of the same values that Americans did. They're Protestant. They even like know the English language to, very much. And anyway, and it's just easier for them to integrate into society. They're more literate. They can read. There's less things happening there. You have a few Irish and German Romans are coming over, but they're going to get discriminated against because of their religion, mostly because it's not Protestant, right? So then you have the new immigrants coming over, and the new immigrants are around 1890s. And these new immigrants are not from necessarily Northern and Western Europe. They're from Southern Europe, Eastern Europe. You got Italians, Greeks, Croats, Slavics, Poles, Russians. So this is a very different group of people. A lot of these people were poor, they were illiterate. I mean, they were fleeing their country probably due to political instability, especially in that region. And they're just not accustomed to democratic traditions. So you have largely Roman Catholic, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Jewish people coming over. An estimated 25% of them were birds of passage, meaning that these are just young men who were contracted for unskilled factory mining construction jobs, and they would work, save up enough money that they would want, and then they return home with that money, you know, for their families. Now, immigration in Asia is going to take a bit of a halt. So it was pretty good for a while there in the 1840s, especially with the gold rush. You you had a lot of Chinese workers coming over, but by 1882 you had the Chinese Exclusion Act, which is then passed. And even though Chinese people were excluded, you still had Japanese and Korean and Filipino immigrants who were coming over to Ohio for Asian contract work and eventually making their way over to California. Um, the anti-Asian feelings were getting pretty high in America, especially since they were taking a lot of jobs. And just nativists in general are just very weary of immigrants taking their jobs, changing their whole way of life, their culture, whatever, right? So Congress passed immigration restrictions from 1917 to 1924 that almost completely stopped immigration from the entire continent of Asia. Only Filipinos, because the United States took possession of the Philippines in 1889 from the Spanish, and they could immigrate. So you got urbanization also happening here. So just keep in mind that look, the immigrants and internal migrants, they're moving to big cities because that's where it's at, and people are abandoning rural life for an urban life, and that stability, right? So you got a lot of millions of young Americans, and they're gonna leave the rural settings of their parents, and they're gonna come to the city and have new economic opportunities, and they're not gonna go back to the farms. Okay, they're gonna stay in the cities, or they're kind of leaving the farm behind. So we have nearly 1 million African Americans. They're going to leave the South for northern cities that have work, have factories, have industrialization, have a place where they can go to that they can make a living and support their family and maybe even be a little comfortable, if you will. So in the cities, upper middle class moved to streetcar suburbs, communities that grew along transit routes leading to an urban center. So if you'll see here, a picture of like a streetcar, and again, these streetcars would go away from the city center, further away, a few miles away, and then that's where the houses were. And so people would live in these, outer suburb regions. I mean, they're still in the city, according to how we would look at it today, but they're just further away from the business area of the city. So those were more of the affluent people that did that. Well, the people who took the place of the people who used to live in the city who were wealthy, but they moved away further. Um, they're gonna move into those areas, and they're gonna start changing. Landlords start changing things in there. So you have ethnic neighborhoods that start to pop up. To increase profits, landlords divided up inner city housing into small windowless rooms. So one of the ways we have is the tenement apartments or buildings, and they would cram. They could cram more than 4,000 people into like a city block. You know, um, and the more they could, the more rent they could get. So eventually, there were laws passed where they had to have a window in each bedroom. So what they started doing is they started building a dumbbell tenement building. You see the middle in section there, how it's hollowed out. So every bedroom would be sure to have a window, so you could open it up, but you're just opening it up into this small little hole. You're opening it up to see your neighbor next door. I mean, it's anyway. You're not looking. It's not like clean air coming through. You know what I mean? They're getting around a law, right? Um, and so it didn't really necessarily improve ventilation if your window was stuck in the middle shaft area. Anyway, and there were other problems that weren't being fixed. You got overcrowding that was constantly happening. It's just filthy. You have diseases like cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis. I mean, so anyway, these buildings, they gave immigrants a chance to sort of get a foothold in America, but it wasn't where you wanted to stay. It was more like a stepping stone to a better time, and hopefully a decade or a few years later, you could get away from there, right? So, but anyway, these ethnic neighborhoods were created based on language, culture, church or temple, and then social clubs. So you also have opposition to immigration. So, I mean, so in 1886, you got the Statue of Liberty that's finally delivered to America. They put it up on the pedestal of the New York Harbor. And again, it's this shining beacon for all these immigrants who are trying to make a better life for them. It's one of the first things they see as they get their eyes on America. So pretty kind of exciting stuff. However, there are a lot of people in America that didn't want them to come. You got labor unions who were kind of motivated by economic concerns. They kind of resented the employers used immigrants to depress wages and break strikes. The way they could break it is they just hire more immigrants as scabs when the workers are striking, and the work continues in the factory. Yeah, business owners who often blame strikes and the labor movements on foreign agitators. So it's funny how the labor unions don't like it, the business owners don't necessarily like it. Yet the nativists who are just who don't like it because they're taking their jobs. They don't like it because they're changing the culture of the Anglo majority. They're very largely anti-Catholic. You're going to see an organization called the American Protective Association, and then you also have social Darwinists who believe that the Southern and Eastern Europeans and all Europeans are biologically inferior to people of English and Germanic heritage. In fact, they're gonna have scientists, like scientists of great um, repute, and they're gonna get up and say, yes, there is a biological difference in brain capacity, if you will, between different races. So I mean, it's social Darwinism. People and like, how could people ever think that? Well, they had scientists and very reputable people saying that, yeah, this is true. So just fascinating stuff, right? How such lies can be perpetuated. It makes you wonder what might be perpetuating in our day. Anyway, so California passed a minor's tax on $20 a month for all foreign-born minors. So if you're in California, you're a foreigner. Now you're paying $20 a month, and then eventually Congress is just going to pick this up to the Chinese Exclusion Act and ban all new immigration from China. So you got the contract labor law of 1885, and that's going to further restrict workers on an effort to protect American workers from competition. Keep in mind that Congress is beholden to the people. And if the people are really concerned about immigration, and many were because they were coming in pretty quickly, um, Congress is going to start passing laws according to how the people are feeling. They even started making literacy tests for immigrants. Um, However, you have President Cleveland who vetoed it. He didn't think that was very constitutional at all. However, it's going to get passed eventually. So Congress represents the views of the people, right? After the opening of Ellis Island in New York Harbor, immigrants had to pass a rigorous medical examination. They had to pay a tax before even entering the United States. So it's becoming harder and harder to get in. Now, in many cities, politicians welcome newly arrived immigrants to gain their loyalty in future elections. So these new immigrants coming in, they would start whole organizations start bringing them under their wing and kind of build them into this political machine where they would take care of them and promise them things if they voted a certain way. And that boss was typically a politician, either elected or was trying to get elected. You have several political machines, such as Tammany Hall in New York City, started as a social club and later developed into powerful centers to coordinate needs of business, immigrants, and the poor. Um, you would have these people being asked to vote a certain way on election day, and if they did, they would give them stuff. They would give them, some form of welfare. Even sometimes, these people would even come by and bring a poor family like a basket of food or something when they're in a depression or something. So whatever their intentions were, they tried to reach out for these people, although it was likely not genuine. They wanted something, right? Now, these machines became a big problem because these machines almost always stole money from the taxpayers in the form of a graft or fraud. And then, even in the case of Tammany Hall, you just had corruption. I mean, Tammany Hall's boss, Tweed, and his cronies caused a lot of problems, took a lot of power. and did a lot of damage for the whole political machine um, way of doing things. And then you have settlement houses that come about. So there were people that saw these immigrants coming and wanted to help. And these people were like from the middle class, and they were well educated, but they wanted to help. And so they created these things called settlement houses. And these are young reformers who hope to relieve the effects of poverty by building social services for the people in the neighborhood. So you have a famous experiment called the Whole House in Chicago, which was supported by Jane Addams and a college classmate in 1889. And basically, what they did is these were settlement houses. They taught English to people. They pioneered early childhood education. They taught industrial arts, established neighborhoods, theaters, music schools. It was kind of like a YMCA, if you will. Like it was a place where people could go and immigrants could learn English and maybe even get some skills and just have a place where they can feel wanted and valued. Um, by 1910, there were more than 400 settlement houses in America's largest cities. Now, although many immigrants remained in low-paying jobs and lived in relative poverty in the tenants, their children, keep this in mind. So the parents come over, the parents are struggling, but their children are the ones who took advantage of the public education. Their children's are the ones who are now educated and can be competitive in an industrial economy. So it's usually the next generation that's going to grow, and they're the ones that are going to be in the middle class of society and continue improving as well. So it's quite the sacrifice for these parents who came over, but most parents, when they immigrate, they do it for their children, and you're going to see many of these children of immigrants. They're going to be blessed as a result of their parents making such a sacrifice of leaving their home and everything that was familiar for a better life for their children, and you're going to see a lot of social mobility happen among the immigrant genealogy class. So, okay, go ahead and write your summary, and we'll discuss this when we return.